Hey, this is Royce Hall, your host of the Wealth Science Podcast. I'm joined this morning by Bryan Falchuk. He is a managing partner of the Insurance Evolution Partners and the writer of the Future of Insurance book. Good to have you this morning.
Thank you very much for having me on, Royce.
Yeah. So before we jump into that, before we jump into what you're doing and the future that you see in the industry, one of the things that came up when we were talking is that you're a bit of a car enthusiast. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm a car
And
nut.
particularly Volkswagens. Why VWs?
So not anymore, and partially because of my experience when I had them. But yeah, I got and I don't know why, but I had this strong passion for the VW Passat, back in the late 90s into the early 2000s, and ended up
so not like the Bug.
No, not the Bug. And there's a whole Jetta and Golf scene. I was never part of that. It was like the family sedan. What's wrong with me, right? But I loved it, and I had one that I customized pretty heavily, and I was it looks svelte. It didn't look, it wasn't like stickers and neon lights and whatever. But I ended up building a community of enthusiasts, and we had 2,500 people, and we did charity work and events, and so it's pretty hardcore into it for a while. And then I sold it to buy an engagement ring, and that kind of started the end of my my involvement in the scene. And now I'm just my wife's getting Audi, so that's still kind of close.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but I'm done with them.
So you don't have any plans to get back into the Passat scene?
No, and I don't think Volkswagen does either. I think the Passat's sort of been an utter failure the past few years. It might even be killed in this country at this point. I don't even know. But yeah, no, I'm done with it. I'm going full bore on the EV side. I'm become practical, save as much as you can, most efficiency, and not Tesla, which makes me stand out, I guess, on the EV fan world.
So we didn't cover this, but what's your EV of choice then? What's the future of EV for you?
Oh, well, so I don't think the right stuff is out yet. The thing I wanted to get, which is not what I got, was a Mustang Mach-E. I just think it's gorgeous. There's a few things I don't like about it. I live in the Northeast. I need a heat pump. So for anyone who's maybe getting too geeking out right now, but that matters, and it doesn't have one yet. So I got something else to buy some time. But there's some really interesting things coming out, and there's a lot of delays for a lot of even more interesting things. So I think probably 3 years from now, we'll be in a very different situation, kind of late 2020s. There's a lot of these 2025 to 2030 bets that car makers have put out there. And so you're going to start to see post 2025 when a lot of these things start hitting. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Although I'm not with you on the Mustang. The Mustang was a little, I don't know, it's a little too different for me. I like the kind of old school muscle car,
Yeah.
I
don't like the Mustang Coupe. I like the Mustang Mach-E, but and I know there's all these Mustang fans that have already switched the show off, and they're like, this guy's like a heretic, cancel him.
Yeah. But, well, you got to make a statement and stick with it. That's the name of the game, right?
Yeah. I think it's really good packaging. We'll put it like that. It makes a lot of sense. There are things it can do better, but first iteration. Anyway, it's still too early. I don't think the right stuff is out yet, so we'll see what happens.
Fair enough. Well, so we've talked about the evolution of cars, if you will.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about what you're doing with the evolution of insurance. You've got the Insurance Evolution Partners, then you have the Future of Insurance. Tell me what's going on in that scene.
Yeah. Well, so unlike cars, where I think, the switch from gasoline to whether you're in the hydrogen camp or the EV camp or flying cars or drones or whatever, that is revolution. That is massive change. And that's, rewind 20 years, there was no Tesla. I'm not going to talk about Lucid or Rivian because who knows what will happen with them, but great products. But in the insurance industry, we had all of this, InsurTech comes out and there's a lot of hype around it. And it's 2 years from now, State Farm's going to be gone. And I don't think so. And it's probably not going to be because of name your InsurTech. Whereas in the auto industry, that might be the case. I don't know. And I don't know that it really would, but it's more possible, I think, than what you see in insurance. I think where the kind of core product is completely being flipped in the auto world, that's not the case in insurance. Risk transfer, risk pooling, even with AI and usage based and like all these things that get people's sense of their exposure and the cost per exposure down to like an N of one and perfection, you still need risk pooling. Because even if I like squeeze all my risk down into this teeny little bubble and it's only, you know, $5 a year for me to insure it, that's not really what the insurance is about. It's about what if something does happen. That $5 worth of risk that I sold could be $100,000, which like that would be a massive deal. You know, most Americans, I think it's 2/3 of Americans don't even have $1,000 for a kind of rainy day fund. So it's not, you know, people are like, well, insurance is going to get so cheap for those really good drivers or those good employers on the workers' comp side or whatever it might be. Yes, but that doesn't mean that they stop buying insurance, even if it wasn't mandated by law, because it's not the cost of the insurance, it's the cost of what happens if. And, you know,
Sure.
some people will make that decision that, you know what, and we see this with healthcare before it was mandated. So people are like, I'm going to go uninsured because I'm not using this stuff. And so it's cheaper for me, you know, added up over 5 years, it's going to be cheaper, even if I need to have surgery once versus paying the annual premium. You know, cars move around. There are things like, doesn't matter how good of a driver you are, it also matters how good of a driver that person is or how icy the road is or whatever it might be. So I think the fundamentals of insurance are still the same. And therefore, I don't think we have this flip everything on its head, all the dinosaurs die, and then we end up with mammals kind of moment coming. And that's why I use the word evolution, because I think it is about, we need to get better. We need to change. We need to meet the needs of the current world we live in. And that's change, right? It's not stagnation, but it's also not like, you know, none of the existing carriers could possibly survive in the new market. And the question then is like, well, how do we evolve? How do we change? And that's what I like to dig into is it's sort of secretly like self-help work or personal development. It's like, how do we help a carrier who's trying to serve people, you know, to put their lives back together? How do we help them to make those shifts, to make those change, to evolve, to meet the needs of the current market and the possibilities that are out there? And that's where I have fun, is like, can I inspire an organization through my books or my consulting work or speaking or whatever, to kind of see that opportunity and figure out how to go for it.
Awesome. Well, it stuck with me. You know, you're talking about you know, the kind of the core product not changing, right?
Mhm.
It's evolving, but it's not being revolutionized. And I just had, me and my family actually just had this experience a few months ago where we were driving down the road and like I was coming to a stop and somebody pulled out right in front of me,
Mm.
and there was a box car between us, or you know, box truck between us, so neither of us could see each other. And the box car driver waved the person on, and you know, we ended up
Wow.
colliding. And I'm a very like, that's the first wreck that I've ever had.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm a very careful driver, but you know, to your point, it ended up happening. And
Right.
you know, thankfully, you know, we had insurance in place, and you know, it ended up
Everyone's
being
okay.
mostly her fault. Yeah, everyone's okay.
Yeah.
And I had everybody in the car. I had both my kids, my wife, and my dog. I
Oh
mean,
man.
they had the whole family unit in the
Yeah.
car. I think the dog was the most shooken up, but we all turned out all right.
All right.
But so
Yeah,
that's interesting.
that's two
So
other drivers you got to worry about, right? Like the box truck
yeah,
driver letting someone in because they don't know what you're about. Shouldn't have done that. And this other
yeah.
driver not seeing you.
Yeah, and thankfully, my grandma. I remember my grandma when I was just learning how to drive. She's like, "Don't ever take anybody. Don't ever wave anybody on, and don't ever take anybody's word when they wave you on. You got to trust yourself." And
Yeah.
I'm like, I think about that all the time now.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. You get to see it firsthand.
Yeah. So, so you talked about you know, your work with the evolution of the industry. Can you give me like, I don't know, one or two nuggets? You know, you're obviously writing the book on the subject.
Yeah.
Give me, you know, one or two nuggets about like how the industry is kind of changing, and then you know, I like to focus on the tech. You know, my company's in the Salesforce and tech side of the insurance business.
Yeah.
How is tech kind of helping the industry evolve as well?
Well, and I think that really is what it boils down to. People sometimes get upset with me. I mean, not like passionately, but kind of let down that I don't talk about a specific solution. Like you should use this particular thing to do this particular thing. Like there's probably 3 or 4 vendors, you know, have a look at them all, see what's right for your needs. There probably is a better choice than others, but it's not about like, you need to be on this cloud, like you should be on AWS, not Azure. Like, I don't know. Actually, maybe you should be on Azure or Google Cloud or like whatever. But there's no universal answer. You need to look at it. And frankly, like the journey of looking at it is part of what will make it more successful, because you need to get invested and understand it better. So I don't generally, harp on one particular solution, but I might talk about themes of types of things. And a lot of it is what we saw starting with the pandemic with lockdowns, is a lot of customer experience things, because suddenly the way we've been working, the way we've been doing, inspections and adjusting in claims, for example, or selling, if it was a face-to-face thing for you, I hear a lot of that in the life insurance and the kind of financial advisor, financial planner world, especially your high net worth folks. You couldn't do that. And so those are spaces where there were remote tools, but the adoption was really low between the customer and the provider side, the carrier or the adjuster or whoever. And so you did see kind of an explosion of that. And I actually was trying to refinance my house right before rates went up, which unfortunately the bank couldn't get their act together in time, which is such a shame.
That's a bummer.
But they were like, oh, you need to have your house inspected and appraised. And I was like, great, what app do I download? And they're like, oh, no, we're not doing that anymore. I was like, oh, you use them during lockdowns? And they're like, yeah. And as soon as we could have people back in the houses, we went back to that. I'm like, you had success right there. And but if you look at insurers, actually, we've adopted this stuff and it's stuck. So, not everything can be adjusted with a phone, but a lot of things can be. So letting the homeowner walk around, waving their phone, or maybe they're on a video call with someone from the carrier that's walking them through it. Point the phone here and it's all being recorded. There's great tools that do that. There's great AI that can run on that to start making estimates, to help the adjuster in their photo or video-based adjusting. You see it in the auto side. There's tools like that have really come to the forefront. That the reality is that wasn't just because we couldn't get out to the person's house for 3 months or 2 months or whatever, your state's lockdowns were. That's just a better way to do it. It's faster, it's cheaper. You get more of the process done because it comes out with, the AI has built the bill of materials or whatever, the likely parts of the car that are impacted. And then you take your expert eye and you say, yes, that sounds right. Or actually, we also need to do this. Or once we get the car in the body shop, we're going to rip it apart. We're going to find out, no, the frame isn't damaged, even though the AI thought like you can tweak, but you're that much further ahead. And you think about the supply chain issues that we've all been seeing. Like if you can get in line to order that lumber first, because you were 3 or 4 days ahead of the curve, or maybe 2 weeks ahead of the curve from when you would have had someone out. It's kind of funny. Like I also, before the refi, we were repainting my house and there was, lots of like areas of rot and there was like some ants in one area. So we needed quite a bit of lumber. And from the time they did the estimate to about 4 months later, when they were on site doing the painting, the labor cost is the same. The lumber cost had doubled. And so like every week of delay, that is actually, in this inflation environment, that is real money. So I give a lot of credit to insurers for recognizing, yes, we had something that I think forced us into it at first, but these are things we should have been changing anyway. And for most carriers, they've instituted and they've kept moving forward. And I was really disappointed on the mortgage side. It was like a nice moment to be like, oh, insurance is more advanced than another industry. But we didn't just say like, oh, good, now we can go back to the same old. That actually wasn't a great experience. And the funny thing is the appraiser didn't want to do it that way either. He's like, if you want to just take some photos and send them to me, I'm not going to say anything, I'll accept them. Because he's like, I don't want to be driving around all day and get like 3 or 4 appraisals done when I could have 10 done without, like gas is getting more expensive. It's a waste of his time. He still gets paid the same. Why not have him be more efficient? It's interesting. So there's a lot of kind of customer experience based impetus for change that I think has started the ball rolling. Now the challenge is whether carriers are like, okay, we did it, we're done, which I've definitely heard from some are like, we did so much, we need a breather, or we need to digest, or we need to kind of tie it back together, because it's sort of been like, held together by tape and band-aids and hamster wheels, versus those who have sort of woken up to the fact that, we actually can do things really quickly and we can do things much more lightweight. I mean, you mentioned CRM, like I've seen some carriers using the CRM as a sort of like API hub because their core system wasn't API ready, but they had built the connection to Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or whatever. And so they're like, well, what if we use that to connect to all these third-party data sources and new tools, and then use the connection we built to bring it back into our core system. There are some nimble ways to put some of these new tools in place that are kind of all around you. And frankly, I think even going back 3, maybe 5 years, we didn't have a lot of those options. But today there are much faster, simpler ways to spin up a new solution, or a point specific solution that's really, smaller, cheaper, better solution for what you're doing. Whereas before we would have looked at something bigger, more monolithic, because it was such a big effort and you want to, tick as many boxes as you can. I think that whole paradigm has really changed. And I think that is the biggest driver of evolution going forward, is the flexibility that we are starting to be afforded from the new way that kind of software development and solutions are coming to market.
Yeah. And that's really interesting as well. Like that's a conversation that we often have with our clients. Obviously in our context, it's around the Salesforce platform, but how do you get all of the data kind of pointing in the same direction, so that, as an insurance company, there's so many data points coming in from everywhere. How do you digest those and put them together so that you can give somebody a quote 3 days faster? Like that's very important. That's very tangible. Or, maybe we get to the point, you're talking about a lot of automation around, taking pictures and AI and analysis. Like, can we automate most of the bidding process or the estimating process? And kind of eliminate some of the middleman and some of the legwork. Now, the thing that I hear, let me push back on this a little bit. The thing that I often hear is just fear around removing the human. You have people that are like, robots are taking over our jobs. Like, okay, but also the quality of care. Like, is a robot or a computer going to care about me, when I send in that picture, the same way that Bryan, you would care if you came out to my property and did an estimate? So, does increase in automation and increase in technology actually decrease the kind of quality of the care that they receive?
Yeah, I mean, this is the debate in pretty much like every webinar that I've been on whenever we talk about technology. I think the problem is, and we're like this, like we're super reductionist. So we see automation only means you've stripped out all of the empathy. And we think human only means empathetic, but really slow. And actually, I think they're both wrong. And it's not an either or. It's a $6 million man kind of situation, but more gender neutral, where like you've got the person delivering the empathy as and when it's needed in the way that it's needed, but you haven't created a bottleneck or delays to get to those points of empathy. And you've recognized that, frankly, speed is also a form of empathy. If you can start someone on the path sooner to getting their life back together, and you can show them that these gates are being met and there's progress in helping them, that is invaluable to someone who's suffering. Knowing where they stand, and that like, I don't know where, but I know it's moving and I know they've got it. That peace of mind, that like, that's what you've paid for. And so to know that things are happening and I'll talk to someone tomorrow, that's great, because I know like they've got it and I can see that they have it, versus like I sent it into a black hole and now I have to wait. So it's a balance of the two. And I think if you just look at one or the other, you're robbing each of the value they could have. And I think that's not a great customer experience. And we all have heard the stories about with like the wonderful claim that was handled by AI and they paid it in 12 seconds. Like that, like the examples of Canada Goose Down jacket, that was like the claim was resolved by AI in 30 seconds and then payment was automatically. It's like that was a damaged jacket. That can and should be done through AI, and like we shouldn't be challenging that. And a person could do that too, but like, why would they? Because you're just robbing them from a situation where like no one needed like, oh my, I'm so sorry to hear it, and like, how are you holding up after the loss of your jacket? Versus like your accident. For a human to recognize, like, and your dog was in the car, how's your dog doing? Because of course, like, the family is one thing, and we can talk to them and we can say, this is what happened, and they can understand. Dog has no clue. They don't even understand car in the first place, other than like a fun place to sit that shakes.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a point of empathy to bring in. That an AI could do that. It could be programmed to do that, but it's different. It's not going to have the same effect. So
Right.
let the AI and the automation take the process out of the picture so that people aren't waiting around to get their hand held, because humans are freer to just hold hands. I was talking to a carrier who has a very heavy AI implementation in their claims process. And one of their adjusters was saying to their chief claims officer, like, I love this coming from a traditional carrier, just because when I get a claim, it's 70% done. And you could take it as like, oh, she's super lazy. That's not her point. Her point is the 70% is frankly, like, it's the crap. It's the setting it up, it's the documentation, it's the trying to connect, like, think of an old school operator and the switchboards, like pulling the pin here and sticking it in there, getting everything to a point where you can then step in. When she gets a claim is the point when she can step in and help. And so she ends up feeling rewarded by her work. And of course, the insured feels rewarded by what they're getting, versus waiting 2 weeks to get to that point. Herculean efforts to get through there. What if you could get there in 2 days instead of 2 weeks? That's game changer, or 2 hours or 2 minutes, because automation took care of the things that were standing in your way, or freed up enough of your work so that you weren't so overloaded that you couldn't hold someone's hand, even if you wanted to.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I think the real takeaway there for me is speed is empathy. I love that quote. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Because you're absolutely right. Like, there's a point as a consumer where I'm like, I need to be cared for right now.
Yeah.
And, that's where, the automation and the technology can come in. Like, I can go online, depending on who I'm working with, right? I can go online and see where I am in the process. It's
Yeah.
kind of like when order the pizza, like, oh, it's in the bake phase. Like, oh, great,
Right.
I've got 3 minutes, and kind of taking that same idea and putting it in insurance of like, okay, here I am in the process. So I know that I am receiving care and getting the right touches at the right time.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do, I help my daughter's robotics club. She's in 5th grade now.
Wow.
And they're doing like Lego robotics. It's pretty cool stuff. I didn't
Yeah.
have that when I was a kid. So I love kind of helping out with that. And that's one of the things that we talk about is like, robotics and automation, they kind of take away the more mindless things. So like data entry or even analysis, and allow humans to do what humans do really well.
Yeah.
And kind of insert the human elements at the right time, because humans are going to be more empathetic. We're going to be more creative. We're going to have that, kind of unique creative problem solving that, computers aren't so good at, right?
Yeah.
They're good at, going from point A to point B in a defined way, or maybe from point A to, it can funnel it to point B, C, or D. But the creative and emotional elements, they're not there yet. If they were, if a computer told me, man, I'm so sorry to hear that, I'd be like, what is this?
Yeah.
You're not sorry.
Right. Right.
Awesome. So one of the things that you mentioned to me, kind of in our setup to this, is you're interested in embedded insurance. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
So embedded insurance, I did not come up with this phrase. A woman named Laura Drabick who did, or at least she's the one who told me it. If you think about insurance generally, is you have to go to the insurance to get it. You buy your car, you got to reach out to the insurance companies or an agent or whatever. Embedded insurance is when the insurance comes to you. So we don't buy something to get insurance. We have to get insurance because of the thing that we bought, the experience or the item, like a car or house or a vacation. That's what we cared about. We didn't care about the insurance. So
Sure.
Embedded insurance is when the sale of the insurance is a part of the process of acquiring that asset or experience in the first place. And in some cases it's explicit, like, I booked an airline ticket last night. Like, do you want travel insurance or not? You have to click yes or no. But it's in that flow. I don't then have to go out to, Google how to get travel insurance or go to a provider or a marketplace and re-enter all my, like, it's just there. It's just one click, just adds it to the ticket price, easy peasy. And it's built into my customer experience of having that plane ticket. If I cancel my plane ticket, I'm going through Delta or whoever, and the insurance impact on my cancelability and the trip and all that is baked into my customer experience as a traveler. So it's not two separated things, and that's much, much better. We see that starting to build in the auto side. And this is actually where EVs, and I talk a lot about EVs and connected cars and where I think all that's going. There's a huge push by the car makers for subscription-based revenue. They've actually made really big splashes about it. They put large dollar numbers on it, how much they think they're going to get from subscriptions. And some of it is really annoying. And like BMW got some flack a couple of weeks ago, rightfully, for switching the car seat heaters into being a subscription, including for people who already bought them, which is ludicrous. Toyota did the same thing with remote start on from the remote control, which is not even internet connected. So I don't know how they're doing that, but that was 4 cars that were already sold, and they both had to backpedal from that. That to me is really stupid and mean. It's one thing if that was the expectation from the start. It's another thing if, oh, surprise, you already paid for this, but we're going to make you pay again. And we're going to disable its functionality going forward if you don't. That's holding your customers hostage. Terrible idea. However, you look at things like autonomous car features. So you get GM Super Cruise, Ford Blue Cruise, Tesla Autopilot. They're being built into the car, and then it's a question whether you activate it. And Tesla doesn't do this, but GM gives you 3 years of Super Cruise for free. Ford's doing an annual, I think it's like 2 years for $199 or something for Ford. Of course, Tesla is $12,000 for FSD to be built into the car, and then it's either $200 or $250 per month for the feature, which I can't understand paying that for autonomous driving, and frankly, it's not ready yet. But some people are doing it. But it's this notion of getting that revenue. Now, one of the things that they need to do that, if you really think about it, is insurance. And the reason why is insurance is standing in the way of the car sale. You go to buy a car, you can't take delivery of that car without insurance being in place. And as these car makers push further and further into subscription, one of the key goals for them is vehicle subscription. And they've played around with this. Volvo's the only one who's really had, Volvo and Porsche actually, the only ones who've stuck with it, and they've been pretty successful. Others have retreated, but I think eventually we'll get that model right. You can't subscribe to a car, which is a totally frictionless kind of process, without having insurance in place and having it baked into the subscription. And it's the same thing, like if you do Zipcar or something like that, insurance is just part of it, because you can't go out and buy an hour-and-a-half policy and, oh, you only use it for 45 minutes. Now what do you call the carrier and cancel? And it needs to be part of the switch on, switch off capabilities of that coverage. And if you think features are on and off, that means the value of the vehicle is changing. With subscription cars, you can change vehicles. So you have an XC40, and then you step up to an XC90. Those are wildly different cars with wildly different costs, but it's all baked into your plan. You'd need a totally different insurance quote, if not policy. So you need that to be baked into the subscription to keep fluctuating as people change their vehicles. None of that future for car makers is possible without auto insurance being embedded into the car purchase or car ownership model that they're looking at. And I think that's really interesting. And to me, that's going to drive a real shift in how auto insurance in particular is sold. And I'm not just talking about personal auto. There's a ton of this going on the fleet side as well. And electrification matters because you see more subscription in electrification offerings, because they also start looking at VinFast is doing subscription to the batteries. You've got subscription to charging solutions or logistics related to the charging on the commercial side, whether that's GM's BrightDrop or Ultium, we call it Ultium Charge 360 on their commercial side. And Ford's got Ford Pro, and they're looking at subscription offerings that include charging. So you have a lot of things that are going to bring insurance into the mix from the car maker. And that just brings a whole number of questions. Who's going to be the insurer? Are the car makers going to replace the insurance companies?
Yeah.
I don't think so. And there's some really basic reasons why I don't think they even could from a capital standpoint. They actually don't have the money to do it. Technically they do, but it's all tied up in their physical plant and their raw materials, and frankly, like their union contracts and their pension obligations. They couldn't start to just park that as statutory capital. But there's whole questions about sales and service, and it's a really interesting thing. I think it will happen. I don't think it will happen tomorrow. I think it's probably a late 2030s thing, and that's the prediction that I've made. And I could be off by a few years, but I don't think I'm off full stop. I think there will be a significant shift as the car fleet starts to turn over. But again, it's still evolution. It's still auto insurance. It's still covering the same things. It's just the ways that it's working, the mechanisms at play are shifting, and that's an evolutionary change, not a, now there's no, when we're all moving around in shared autonomous flying pods, that's revolution. Well, that's not, I don't believe any of the, like those predictions said, I think by like 2023, 2025, depending what you believed, I still have to, turn a wheel and push a pedal like a schlub today. Like we're not in these flying things yet.
Yeah, I remember back when I was a kid, like, it was all, hey, we're going to be, we're all going to be driving around on cars on the moon, by the, 2020s. And it's like, oh man, we're, maybe the billionaires are close to that, but the rest of us are not close to that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm watching For All Mankind right now. So I'm like, well, we could have been doing it in the 80s if that had just played out, but.
Yeah. So, what is an evolution or a revolution that was kind of let you down that you were looking for and you're like, it's hype and it's kind of boom and bust?
So there's one that that I think is a pretty valid example. I couldn't say that it let me down because frankly I didn't expect it to play out all that fast like some of the predictions were saying, and also because I'm not sure I fully understand all of it. But that's blockchain. I think there is absolutely a future for blockchain in insurance. I think there are a number of things, and specifically like distributing the ledger or distributing information across multiple nodes and parties and being able to share that securely, I think is a really big deal. I've had a history in cyber insurance, and so that fascinates me from a security standpoint as well. But there's so much information sharing across different carriers, across different parties. You think about a claim, it's multi-party. To be able to facilitate that, just the claim would be hugely transformative and driving efficiency for the insurance industry. You can start to do that on underwriting. And someone was telling me the other day is like, you get a quote from 10 carriers and they're all getting motor vehicle reports on you. Like LexisNexis does very well from that, but why is someone buying the same report 10 times over? What if there was some kind of clearinghouse way to share that? I mean, there's lots of examples like that. You can't for a number of reasons, but you could. And I think blockchain could facilitate that. And there's all sorts of other great uses for it, but it just hasn't materialized. There's a couple pockets here or there where it's starting to be used, and that's great. I think it was a technology looking for a solution just yet, or an implementability, if that's a word. I think it'll get there, but I think, much like flying cars, kind of mid 2010s, it was like, and blockchain, and we got to figure this out because it's going to be here tomorrow. And I was like, well, I'm not going to be here because I'm already being put out of the job by that drone that you were so worried about last year, or the AI you're also worried about this year. So do I even need to worry about blockchain? Because you've already said I'm going to be gone. I'll just sit in the back of this flying pod and be zipped around everywhere. But I think blockchain is the one that's like, that was hype. It is still hype from an implementation standpoint. I think it will come, but let's just calm down for a minute and really think about what's the need, and then see if that technology solves for it. We keep the hype stuff is like new technology. Look, that's great, but so what? And the part I don't understand is NFTs, which is not really an insurance thing, but I get blockchain. I really don't get NFTs, and I'm not sure I do. Maybe I'm just showing my age, but that's definitely like way over. I just don't see the point of that, but that's a different problem.
I've got those debates with my friends too. I've got some friends who are, really into it, and others are just like, it's all hype, 100%.
Right.
So
right.
I'm kind of with you. I'm like, I don't know what to make of it. And again, maybe that's not for my generation, but it'd be interesting. Like, I can't see how an NFT would interface with the insurance world unless you're somehow insuring NFTs.
Yeah. And that's
I don't know.
But yeah. People were like, well, you sell books. What if you sold your book as an NFT? And so if someone resold your book, then you'd still make money from it versus today. And I was like, yeah, that's not a good enough use case for it. Like, you make so little selling books. Like, do I need to make 3 more cents when so like,
Yeah.
But maybe I'm just missing the point. But then again, my books
Yeah,
don't
I
sell
just
for some of the like a Banksy NFT or whatever some of these things are going for millions or
I just need the Geico gecko in like 50 different colors and wearing 50 different hats. That's all you need right there.
yeah. Yeah.
That's
And again,
revolution of the
that's like
industry.
right. So like what's the point? But I think the point will emerge in a number of ways um and then we'll have ways to deploy it. So I think it's interesting. It's got to solve its energy efficiency issue though, because I think that's one of the reasons why NFTs don't sit well with me is the mechanism to make them possible is unbelievably wasteful. And we've got all the arguments over carbon emissions and greenhouse gases and regulating that. It's like this is something that honestly is still fairly frivolous, I think, and it hasn't really found its purpose. So let's not waste on that because we got people's houses are burning and people are being killed by floods right now at the same time. And you've got extreme drought and extreme flooding and extreme wind. These things that are like, do we need that? It's just adding to the problem. I think we should pause on some of that stuff and think a little bit more about what's necessary and what would actually benefit from that. Because now it's all cost. There's no benefit at the moment. I don't think, not material.
Yeah. So let me ask you one more question. We've been talking for a little bit now, so I want to be respectful of your time as well. But one of the things that we kind of like to ask on our show is, what's your superpower? That's not necessarily like I can fly or whatever, but what do you do that you kind of do extraordinarily well?
I'll keep it insurance focused because I have an insurance superpower, which is not a superpower, but in insurance, maybe it is. I really actually have a ton of passion for the industry. And luckily I've gotten the chance to work in a lot of different functions and different kinds of carriers and markets and geographies. And I just have a lot of energy for it. I think insurance is actually fascinating. I think there's a ton of very cool things going on, but I think at its core, it's really important. And if you want to call it a superpower, when I talk about this stuff, I tend to be able to get people like re-excited about why they signed up for this in the first place. And everyone's like, oh, I got into it by accident. Even those who got into it by accident, I did too. To have that reconnection to the purpose, I think is really critical. And like I said, I don't talk about specific technologies. It's sort of like values and ethics, a culture discussion through talking about change and opportunity and the things that are buzzing around. And I love that. I love watching people get excited about how they're spending their days. And this is one where it's super fashionable to make fun of insurance and say, oh, I know we're boring and no one, people make fun of me for working in insurance, but try thinking of a single thing that happens in the world without insurance enabling it. I mean, governments, people driving around, the clothes, everything that happens in the economy globally is underpinned by insurance, allowing it to happen because we took the risk out of that thing ever taking place out of the equation so that business could get on with its business, or that government could build that dam, or that person could ride their but like whatever it is, it's not just putting lives back together. We actually enable everything. And that's pretty profound. So like I love getting people reconnected to that sense of purpose. And so far, generally, I've been able to do that when I step on stage or someone picks up one of my books or just have a chat. I mean, that's really cool because we actually need great people working in this space to continue to fuel the great things that we get to do in this world.
Yeah, that's the way that you frame that now, like I hadn't even thought about it like that. That's a really amazing thing about how insurance is driving industry, because as a business leader, you're always thinking about risk and how do you mitigate the risk of this happening. Like if this happens, do we
Right.
all lose our jobs and I go bankrupt? And being able to, for a price, remove that risk so that you can act boldly, giving, that's, I think, the real underlying thing here is you're enabling leaders to act boldly without the fear of this is all going to crumble under our feet if we make one misstep. And you have that kind of built-in ability, like we all make mistakes, we all make misjudgments. There's some people out there that have put everything in blockchain and it hasn't panned out the way they want, and it's like, okay, how do we stabilize that environment so that we as humans can be inventive we can do the things that humans do really well, think outside the box and build the next thing. I hadn't really thought about it like that. That's really cool. You're getting me excited about that. That's really cool.
I'll admit I hadn't thought about it that way either until about a year and a half ago when I thought about lots of pieces of it, but I just assumed there's stuff that we really have nothing to do with that. And as I started to connect the dots, I was like, public stuff or, governments. And I'm like, no, because they have contractors doing that work, or there's raw materials that they're getting, or, there's people they employ and those people have health insurance and like all of it. Actually, think about it. It's really, really hard to, even if you have to connect a few dots to get there, there's some node that if it wasn't for that, the rest of the dominoes wouldn't fall. And that relied on insurance, whether it was a supplier contract or whatever. And so I was like, yeah, actually, you know what? We really do power the entire realm of possibilities for what can be done in this world. And people can argue with me about that, or they can, in this industry at least, just accept it and be like, that's pretty amazing. So what can I do? And that's what I love people to see is wow, that's a lot bigger than just answer the phone if these people call with a question. That's not how you sell someone on a job. It's look, there's people who are gonna run into trouble and they need help desperately. Their lives have been seriously hurt. They need you. That's a very different, oh, I better get the phone when they call versus yeah, sit here if the phone rings, make sure you take down their information. It's it's the same job. It's just recognizing the real nature of what you're doing. And I think we all could use that because there's so much oh, it's boring, and it actually isn't. And it's really necessary.
Well, Bryan, we'll just close on that. That's powerful stuff. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Royce.
Thank you.